That is only for white people. And girls don't do that. These were common statements I heard growing up. That was the space I was in. And as hard as these statements hit me, they catalyzed my desire at the age of 7 to be a human rights lawyer. Because as the poet Rumi says, the wound is where the light enters you. So as introduced, I'm Angela, and I'm an international human rights lawyer, and I've been doing this work for 17 years. I'm thrilled to be here and very grateful for the opportunity to share my story and my work with you. Today, I'm going to take you through what it's like to be a Black woman from Africa, from the global majority, working in international spaces on human rights violations. I'm going to take you through the obstacles and the opportunities, but most importantly, I'm going to show you how my work has provided me with a prevailing sense of hope. And there are 5 things in particular I'll share when we get there. So what exactly do I do for a living? Working closely with victims and survivors of human rights violations, I investigate, I take their stories, I research the law that applies to their situation, and with other colleagues and lawyers, we try and secure justice before domestic courts, regional courts, and international courts. Sometimes going to court is not the most effective thing, so you engage other tools like advocacy, where you would engage with government officials or legislators to try and change policies and laws that hinder human rights. Sometimes it's about legal empowerment. I ran a project where we would go into remote communities with high rates of gender-based discrimination, everything from domestic violence to child marriage, and we would give women much-needed access to lawyers and to information about their rights. So it's all about making an impact and the different ways in which you can do that. So that's in a nutshell what I do, but I want to shed some light on why I do what I do. The short version is my experiences as a child with racial discrimination and gender-based discrimination paved the way for this work. But let me take you back to the very beginning. I grew up in the southern African country of Zimbabwe, a beautiful country. Unfortunately, due to the long-lasting impact of colonization, I experienced racial and gender-based discrimination. But don't get me wrong, I had a lot of privilege, and I consider myself extremely lucky in comparison to many of my peers. But there were difficult moments as well. Colonial Zimbabwe, or Rhodesia as it was known then, was established in 1890 under the supervision of Cecil John Rhodes. Cecil John Rhodes was a British imperialist who thought it was the white Anglo-Saxons' duty to conquer the world. Rhodes said, and I quote, "I contend that we are the finest race in the world, and that the more of the world we inhabit, the better it is for the human race. Africa is still lying ready for us. It is our duty to take it." That was his mentality and the mentality of the colonial settlers who came with him. Racial segregation was implemented everywhere. The buildings you could access, the land you could occupy, the schools you could go to. This official white minority rule lasted for 90 years. We had white people who were 5% of the population oppressing everybody else. Imagine a world where you are a second-class citizen in your own country, where your human dignity, your freedom of movement, your access to opportunities, all curtailed on account of your physical appearance. My parents have very vivid stories about what it was like living under colonial rule and not having access to so-called white-only spaces. Thankfully, our liberation heroes fought long and hard for independence, and they secured independence in 1980. But racism doesn't just disappear overnight. It has had a knock-on effect for many generations, many people, myself included. My parents worked very, very hard to make sure me and my siblings went to the best schools. But at that time, those schools were white-owned, white-run, populated by white students, and white teachers. I remember being the only Black girl in class sometimes. But I knew I was getting a quality education, so I was determined to make the most of it. Sure, it was difficult when the white children didn't want to sit next to you in class, or the white children didn't want to play with you at break time, or the mockery and the classic name-calling because they think you look like the person they so disrespectfully refer to as their maid, the person who cleans up after them, the person who makes their beds. Because back then, all white people had domestic support staff, and they were always black, and they weren't always treated with respect. So that was the space I was in. That's the colonial racism. Sprinkle in a little colonial patriarchy as well. And that dictated that as a girl, you were worth less than a boy. Boys had no limits placed on their dreams, their capabilities often exaggerated, and they just had access to everything. That was the space I was in. So then I moved to South Africa to study law, and I was so excited because it was my dream to be a human rights lawyer. But there I found myself again, experiencing racism, different context, but same discrimination. I was 7 years old the first time a white person refused to sit next to me, and fast forward 11 years later, at university, I'm having the exact same experience. South Africa was under apartheid rule from 1948 until 1994. And that meant that there was racial segregation everywhere. Although I moved to the country after apartheid had ended, like Zimbabwe, racism doesn't just disappear overnight. It's passed on, even when it becomes more subtle. That was the space I was in. But this is not a woe is me story. This is a story about empowerment, because the prejudice I experienced inspired me to be a human rights lawyer. It gave me the strength and resilience I needed to do this work. Because I knew that there's a lot of work to do. And by now, after 17 years, I've lived in 2 continents, 6 countries, and been to over 45 countries in the world for my work, and I've experienced and seen discrimination everywhere. Professionally as well, discrimination is rife in my sector, which is ironic because we are the people who know what human rights are, we know what equality is, we know what dignity is. But I could tell you many stories about racial discrimination and gender-based discrimination in my work. For example, the time I reported a supervisor for racism, the use of racial slurs and sabotaging my work. The response I was met with is, she can't be racist, she has a black friend. Professionally, I've been told, you're from Africa, you can't do that. I've been told, you're black, no one's gonna take you seriously. I've been told, even worse, you're a woman, you should just give all of this up. Giving up was the last thing on my mind. How can I give up when 1 in 8 women, aged 15 to 49, has been sexually or physically assaulted in the last 12 months? How can I give up when every 3 seconds, somewhere in the world, a girl is forced to get married? How can I give up when 103 countries have never had a female head of state? How can I give up when globally women occupy only 30% of managerial positions? And what about people with disabilities? What about non-binary people? What about racial and ethnic groups? The list goes on. How can we give up in the face of all of this? And the answer is simple, we can't. Because that would mean you've lost hope, and that we cannot have. So what are the 5 things that give me hope? I mentioned that I would say this, and now is the time for that, because I think it's the most important thing. The first one is a principle called Ubuntu that we have in African cultures. And it dictates that we are interconnected and interdependent because of our shared humanity. It's about empathy, it's about compassion. And I believe that this is what connects us. The second thing that gives me hope is our victims and survivors. I have worked with incredible victims and survivors who have been so brave and so resilient. And for as long as they don't give up, I don't give up. I've also worked with fantastic activists who have gone from being a survivor to being an activist and a community leader. For example, this is Fatou Balde. She's a Gambian FGM activist. FGM is female genital mutilation. And Fatou was cut when she was just 7 years old. She then went on to found her own organization, and now she works in communities to prevent FGM. I remember being in her office not long ago, and it is a warm, secure space that mirrors the way she makes women and girls feel as she does her activism. Memory Banda is another activist I have to mention. She's a young Malawian woman who saw her 11-year-old sister married off to a man in his 30s. And from that moment on, she dedicated her life to fighting child marriage. Her efforts, along with other people, led to the Malawian government banning child marriage in 2015. How can I lose hope when I work with such incredible people? The other thing that gives me hope is I remind myself that every little bit counts. There are many ways you can quantify impact. It's the big things, it's the little things, and it's everything in between. I remember interviewing a survivor of torture, and in the middle of the interview, she stopped me to say that it had been so cathartic and healing just to tell someone her story, because up until then, she'd never shared her story to anyone, let alone someone who was trying to help her. And so just listening and being present with her in that moment made an impact on her. Or the time when me and my colleagues from South Africa tried to have the former president of Sudan arrested. He's wanted on charges of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. His alleged offenses include murder, rape, pillage against his own people in Darfur, Sudan. As he was a head of state at the time, this was a very high-profile case, and I received death threats and hate mail for working on this issue. And we were unsuccessful in the end, but I also received so many messages from Sudanese refugees all over the world just to say thank you for trying. Thank you for remembering that we are still waiting for justice. And it was a reminder, again, that every little bit counts. I mentioned the legal clinics in the beginning. This is a project where we go into community and we get permission from the village elders and the chief, and we talk to everybody about women's rights. And then we have dedicated one-on-one sessions where we set up a station and women and girls can come. We're under the trees, we're on the floor, whatever the village infrastructure allows, and women and girls come with their issues. And we give them legal advice and legal representation. There was a young lady, I remember, she came and she waited in the line for at least 30 minutes. This is one of the clinics we attended. And she said to me, I have no legal issues, but I just wanted to say thank you for coming to our community because I feel it makes a difference. So every little bit counts. The fourth thing that gives me hope is I've seen people change. I've had usually white men who realize we're on the same team and they cannot reconcile my expertise with my physical appearance. But those are the same people who now refer cases to me because they've changed their perspective. So for as long as people can change, I think there's always reason to be hopeful. The last thing I will share about where I find my hope is support and community. I've been supported by women of color from all over the world and like-minded souls. And that solidarity, that ability to lift each other up has meant the world to me. So for those of you who've ever felt marginalized or targeted or ignored on account of your sexual orientation, your gender, your identity, whatever it is that makes you unique, I want you to remember you are worth more than they will ever know. You will succeed. You are remarkable. If I could talk to my 7-year-old self, I would say, you will go on to be featured in the media. You will do impactful human rights work. You will give a TED talk before a wonderful audience. And so I want to invite all of us today to remember that this space, it's not my space, it's not your space, but it's our shared space. And so ask yourself today and every day, what can I do differently in our shared space? How can I be part of the solution and not the problem? And most importantly, how can I generate and hold on to a sense of hope? Thank you.